It's November 1969. Italian film director Michelangelo Antonioni is listening to Pink Floyd's recently released Ummagumma album. The filmmaker is searching for soundtrack music that would appeal to a youth market. On hearing the album's live version of Careful with That Axe Eugene, he promptly invited the band, along with road manager Peter Watts and roadie Alan Stiles, over to Rome to record music for his latest movie, Zabriskie Point, a rambling counterculture cash-in set in the California desert. From the resulting sessions, there are over 30 separate pieces of music in circulation, and more thought to be still unreleased. Although many of these tracks are simply alternative versions of the same basic songs, the music was released both officially and unofficially over many years under a variety of different song titles. The names given to these tracks, like Fingal's Cave and Benoni, were long thought to be the invention of bootleggers. However, these names, which were based on ancient mythology, were written on tapes that the band gave to a radio DJ called Don Hall.
In a while, I'll find the time to make the sunshine mine.
He also worked as the musical advisor to Antonioni for the Zabriskie film. Hall broadcast these tracks on his Californian radio show, and this was the source of many of the bootlegs, including the much-loved Omiad LP.
An eagle flies in clear blue skies, breathing in the clear blue air.
It's DJ Hall's voice, incidentally, that can be heard talking at the start of the Heartbeat Pigmeat song.
They're taking our nags, Ace. Yeah, you'd make a damn good target for themselves. Let them have it. Win a Florida holiday and a color TV.
The band spent a month in Rome working on the new tracks, written in a softer, more countrified flavour that the band was starting to favour more around this time, as they started to distance themselves from their psychedelic past. The director was still unsure as to what tracks he would use until only a few days before the film's February premiere. Ultimately, despite a full album's worth of tracks, only 3 completed Floyd songs were included in the film and its resulting soundtrack album. The band has claimed that the director scaled back their input because he didn't want their name overshadowing his. The film, by the way, was a commercial disaster and is regularly voted one of the worst ever. Another project that didn't materialise around this time was the band's soundtrack to a cartoon called The Adventures of Rollo. The cartoon featured artwork by illustrator Alan Aldridge, famous for his wonderful interpretations of Beatles songs. The cartoon centred around a boy who flew around outer space collecting animals for a zoo. The band was still referencing this cartoon as late as April 1970, so they must have been well committed to it. A pilot episode of the cartoon was known to have been made, and it did feature the band's music. It's unsure, however, if these were newly created tracks or simply existing ones. The next soundtrack work that the band were involved with would be an educational biology film called The Body. It's a mesmerising film to watch. It's full of wonderful ideas and some astonishing camera work. Its music is largely created by Roger Waters and experimental musician Ron Geesin, although the other Floyd members do play on the album, as do some of the Atom Heart Mother musicians. The band befriended Ron Geesin a year or so earlier, and the Ummagumma track Several Species of Small Furry Animals builds all the hallmarks of his avant-garde, music concrete soundscapes. He is, after all, Scottish, who were once known as the Picts, you know, the ones who the small furry animals in the cave were grooving with. If you get past the farting and the belching of the first track, this album is a hidden gem and very much the missing link between Ummagumma and Atom Heart Mother. With his first invitation for us to breathe in the air, this album reveals Waters' developing interest in lyrics about the cycle of life, a concept that he toyed with over the previous year with the Day in the Life of a Man suite.
Cry, baby, cry. Grow, baby, grow. Stand on your own. Holidays and happy days at home.
In a 1969 interview, Waters references that the band were planning to record a Cycle of Life piece in December of that year. But with so many concurrent projects running around this time, it's hard to know what, if anything, this ended up being. There's another song that focused on the fragility of human life. It was played by the band for almost 3 years, but yet never fully realised as a fully produced release. This is The Embryo. The Embryo started life as a tender acoustic number, noted for its release on a Harvest Records compilation LP without the band's consent. A much heavier version would feature in the band's live shows around this time, often as a show opener. It's baffling to understand why this track was never featured on either Ummagumma, Atom Heart or even Meddle, although its screaming guitar midsection did eventually find its way into Echoes.
Gloom, gloom, always needs a little more room. Whisper low, here I go, I will see the sunshine show.
As 1970 arrived, the band turned in yet another direction, one that would redefine them and lay the foundation blocks for their phenomenal future. Originally titled The Amazing Pudding, this track first premiered as early as the 17th of January 1970, while the band were just concluding work on the Zabriskie soundtrack. It was played in France a few days later, where Dave Gilmour described the track, in fluent French no less, as something they had written only last week. Now, considering the song's complexity and length, I suspect that this is an exaggerated claim, and it's more likely that the song was well developed whilst they were in Rome, especially when one considers that it started life as a Gilmour melody he called Theme for an Imaginary Western. Considering that Zabriskie Point is set in a desert, it's highly probable that Gilmour had the film's imagery in his mind when initially sketching the main Atom Heart theme out. the original of which was played more in a style that evoked the kind of Italian spaghetti westerns that were popular around this time. This opening was originally called Call to Exist, with Nick Mason's drums very much driving the whole piece. There were sections in the original where short drum solos appear, as if they're kind of makeshift placeholders, as if the band didn't quite know what to put in its place at that time. A basic version of the track was recorded in March, but the band felt dissatisfied with it, leaving Geesin to develop the track as he saw fit. Next we have Breast Milky, with a Geesin flavoured cello now replacing Wright's original organ solo. By all accounts, the actual recording of the orchestral parts was a disaster. Geesin was greeted with open disdain from deliberately uncooperative performers who openly mocked his lack of experience and his avant-garde approach. In the end, it was choirmaster John Aldis who stepped in to conduct and arrange things. In some ways, Aldis is a kind of unsung hero of this piece, as he ended up softening the more aggressive edges that Geesin had originally planned. In Mother 4, Geesin adds a female choir where Gilmour and Wright once traded ghostly choral lines. The live performances of the track over 1970 and 71 were equally problematic for the band, due to them having different choirs and orchestras for most nights, with local musicians being hired to perform the piece. Originally titled Split Knees, Funky Dung is a sequence that would more or less be repeated in metal the following year. But here Geesin adds a choir chanting abstract words. Some people have interpreted these as being food names that have been sang in a slightly exaggerated Scottish accent. See what you think.
Silence in the studio.
The surreal Mind Your Throats Please is very much a Geesin piece, with Wright adding bursts of mellotron to create the sound of passing trains, crisscrossing and gathering speed, like on the London Underground. Fittingly, its original title was The Tubular Journey. It's the voice of Nick Mason, though, who not only calls for silence in the studio, but also informs us that this is an important announcement before a train hurls in through our minds. The final Remergence section is a somewhat disjointed and sloppy attempt to intertwine the various musical themes over each other. The piece does, however, regain its focus just in time for the glorious finale in the reprise of the original Father's Shout theme. It wasn't until a day before its performance in Hyde Park that the piece was finally christened Atom Heart Mother, the title coming from a newspaper article published in the London Evening Standard. The article was about a woman who'd been fitted with an atomic-powered pacemaker. It apparently did its job and she lived to a ripe old age of 88. It was Ron Geesin that told Roger to find the new title in the paper, and it's interesting to consider some of the other headlines in that edition that could have caught his eye instead. The band spoke favourably about this piece at the time, and it became an established part of their set over the next year or so. However, over time, all concerned have gradually distanced themselves from it and now view it as a kind of failed experiment. For fans, however, the suite has a life and personality all of its own, and it's just as innovative and risk-taking as anything else that the band has created before or since. It was well liked enough by filmmaker Stanley Kubrick, who asked Waters personally if he could use the piece in his Clockwork Orange film. Kubrick was refused on the grounds that he wanted to edit the piece and use it as only he saw fit, with no input from the band. The Atom Heart cover, along with other prog rock albums, can be briefly spotted in the film as Alex peruses the Chelsea drugstore record shop in search of two horror show debauchkas. Personally, I think that the gamble to hand over a partially completed track to Geesin paid off, and we are left with a unique triumph, an original and glorious epic that combines beauty and menace in equal measure. Side 2 of the album is structured in a similar way to Ummagumma, with each band member having creative control over one of the 4 tracks. First up is Roger Waters with If, a reflective ballad in an understated acoustic style that he was favouring a lot around this time.
If I go insane, please don't put your wires in my brain.
The introspective lyrics are delivered in a hushed whisper, and they are our first real indication of the emotional depth that Waters would later layer his tracks with. With references to going insane, wires in brains, the distance between friends and not talking to someone as much as you should do, this track is almost certainly Waters' first meditation on his ex-bandmate Syd Barrett.
If I were a good man, I'd understand the spaces between friends.
During the summer that Atom Heart Mother was recorded at Abbey Road, Barrett was also there creating his second solo album, with Gilmour and Wright lending him more than a helping hand. The feelings of regret and guilt are perhaps a reflection of how Waters was starting to perceive his relationship with Syd, who by now was starting to unravel at an alarming rate. Apparently Barrett would sneak into the studio and spy on Floyd whilst they were recording, perhaps wondering if he too could join in with the game. Personally, with the repetitious lyrics, I've always thought that this song slightly outstays its welcome and would have been more effective if it had been cut shorter or even split up in a similar way that Pigs on a Wing would later be used on Animals. When Barrett's departure became imminent, the band's management had high hopes that Rick Wright would replace him as the band's chief songwriter. The fact that it took him over a year to complete this song perhaps suggests why this didn't happen. This jaunty number was originally called One Night Stand, and it centres around the passing romances that the band would encounter through life on the road. When one considers that the summer of 1968 was when Syd Barrett left the band, I've always felt that the "How do you feel?" question is probably directed towards him. This much-loved song is a real highlight of side 2, and it's a shame that this side of the band and Rick's writing in general weren't heard more. The song was liked enough by the Brazilian National Bank to use in a TV commercial in the early 70s. The advert received massive exposure for years and was played prior to their main evening news broadcasts.
Com o prestígio do Banco Nacional e das empresas do Grupo Nacional, você vai assistir agora a uma emissão jornalística da Rede Globo.
You really get the sense that Wright is enjoying himself playing this track. And as the piano skips along, you feel Wright's love of the Beach Boys and the Beatles with a summery Penny Lane quality to it. There's some debate as to whether or not the brass parts are real instruments or a mellotron, but with its recording date overlapping the Atom Heart Mother track, it's probable that the brass section was played by the same musicians also.
Goodbye to you, Charlotte Pringles Dew. I've had enough for one day.
The spine-tingling ending of the track sees the tone shift completely as Wright bids a melancholic farewell to one of his one-night stands. Charlotte Pringle may have been memorable enough to recall in the song, but really she's just like all the other girls, and you get the feeling that it's her that's shedding a tear at the end of the song, and not Rick. Dave Gilmour's side 2 offering opens with church bells ringing. The melody, known as the Grand Chichesters, is common in most English churches and one that Gilmour would have heard a lot growing up around Cambridge. It's generally thought that only he and Wright appear on this track, with Gilmour playing both the bass and drum parts, something that he would later claim to regret, and rightly so, as the track does have a lightweight and clumsy quality to it, with more than its fair share of missed drum beats. The track was much improved, however, when it was performed live, with the whole band adding far more personality and solidity to it. It will be extended by up to 10 minutes with an expanded Sing to Me organ solo in the middle.
And if you see, don't make a sound. Pick your feet up off the ground, and if you hear as the warm night falls a silver sound from a tongue so strange, sing to me, sing.
Gilmour grew up in a wonderful part of the world, with his childhood home being directly opposite the huge Grantchester Meadows, a beautiful grassed area with the lazy Cam River meandering through it. Strumming along without a care, there's a fragility and almost whisper to Gilmour's voice, as if not to wake the listener's relaxed slumber as day turns to dusk.
Don't mind the barrel, I like barrelling and stuff in. Oh, I've got a terrible back. When I work, it hurts me. You know what I mean, John? Well, he's still there. I'm driving on the road, he has a sleep. He's still there, he's ready for the gig. I'm driving on the road, he has a sleep. Oh no, he's ready for the gig. I'm driving.
This strange number is perhaps the last remnants of the aborted The Man the Journey idea, which featured an after-work tea break in which the band would be served refreshments on stage by their roadie, Alan Stiles. It was largely driven by Nick Mason, who recorded Alan eating his breakfast at his home, in what would be the forerunner for the band's abandoned Household Objects project, in which everyday items would be used to create instrumentation. The example here being Alan's match strike to light the gas oven becoming a percussion beat. Another idea from the very rare live versions of this track would be the band listening in a tongue-in-cheek manner to family favourite radio DJ Jimmy Young, something that they would revisit later in their 1974 shows.
Regent Street with reckless abandon. So if you're all sitting nice and comfortably at home, avec peine poise, your pen's poise, William, I can see. Right. horse to wheel jolly well.
Time has not treated this track kindly, and the novelty of the spoken word loops and the stereo pan sound effects become somewhat tiresome with repeated listening. Well, a nice touch though is that on early pressings, the dripping tap at the end was cut into the runoff groove, so it played indefinitely. The music, however, is a pure delight, and it's separated into 3 parts. Each has a warm, comforting glow, evocative of a sleepy Sunday morning. The middle sunny side up section is the development of a Gilmour piece called Rain in the Country that was planned for the Zabriskie movie, the bass line of which would be recycled into the funky dung section of the Atom Heart Mother Suite. The other 2 sections are in a similarly relaxed and playful mood, and it's generally thought, due to the recording dates coinciding with the body, that it's Dave Gilmour and not Roger Waters playing bass here. It's unsure if the Morning Glory relates to waking up with the old dawn horn, or the Morning Glory plant, the seeds of which are hallucinogenic. As a lazy afternoon nap to sleep off the excesses of side 1, the second half of Atom Heart Mother works wonderfully. The album was released in October of 1970, some 9 months after the initial Atom Heart Suite was first played live. The reviews at the time were largely positive, and the general consensus being that the band had found a new direction and level of maturity after several years in the wilderness. It reached number 55 in the US charts and the top 10 of most European countries. However, it was at home that it gave the band their first number 1. The cover is pure hypnosis magic. It's a kind of anti-cover, and it reflects the band's desire to distance itself from the space rock psychedelia that they were associated with. The idea came to designer Storm Ferguson from Andy Warhol's Cow wallpaper print. It was photographed at Kit's End Farm in the Potter's Bar, Barnet area, midway between London and Cambridge. The cow was apparently identified by the farmer as being Lulubelle III, and I can't help thinking that this is a tall story with the owner hoping he could cash in on royalties or something. 2 alternative covers that were thought to be presented to the band would have a woman in an Art Deco hallway. This ended up being used on a Principal Edwards Magic Theatre album. The other was a diving man that ended up on a Def Leppard album. Now, the diving man idea was apparently confirmed by the official band management. However, considering that this idea was central to the Wish You Were Here theme, I can't help thinking that they've got something muddled up. Any other cover is simply unimaginable. It's perfect and among the best of their many great artworks. In many ways, it's the start of a new Floyd, one that was developing its own identity, one that was fun and quirky and unpredictable. The cow seems to be looking at us with a combination of both boredom, content, intrigue and threat. Emotions that sum the whole album up in many ways. In my mind, the acoustic aspects of this record create images of broad summer meadows and playful sunlight in the English countryside that I adore. Yet the ethereal choir and bold orchestration casts shadows and brings looming clouds to the horizon. Along with Lulubelle, there also lurks in these fields a madcap Scotsman, frolicking around, annoying everyone by throwing notes everywhere and waking people up blowing his trumpet. Atom Heart Mother may not be everyone's cup of breakfast tea, but for me, it's home.
If somebody said to me now, here's £1 million, go out and play Atom Heart Mother, I'd say, you must be fucking joking.